Happened like last minute.
And we are, so hold on. It's going slowly but surely. Perfect. Okay, we're live.
All right. Awesome. So welcome, celebration of the 19th Amendment, the amendment to the Constitution, which gave women the right to vote.
Sorry, wanna broadcast? We have to actually broadcast. Sorry. It's practice mode still.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm about to, okay. And we're good.
Okay. Hi, welcome. My name is Heidi Graham, and I am president of the League of Women Voters of Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, Buffalo Grove, including Elk Grove Village, Prospect Heights, and Wheeling. League is 100% a volunteer organization at the local and county levels, and even at our state level, we have very few employees. In fact, right now, I think we're down to one. We have, unfortunately, we're in the search for an executive director as well as a communications director. National has paid staff, but even the national board is volunteer. Our mission for 100 years has been to empower voters and defend democracy. And while women is in our name, our modern organization is open to all genders, gender identities, and nationalities. But, you know, after 100 years, we're hard pressed to change our name. So why am I here doing this presentation today, August the 26th? Because today is the day that the 19th Amendment, the amendment to the Constitution, which gave women the right to vote, was certified. It was ratified by the final state August the 18th of 1920, but it wasn't certified to become law until August 26th. So how did we get here? So we're going to go over sort of the major history points of how we got from point A to point B, this long fight for women to be able to vote. And what are we up to now? What are our next steps? So the question most people have is, when did women first start talking about the right to vote? Did it happen at Seneca Falls? Was it, you know, in the late 1800s? Actually, the time that women voting became an issue is even before our founding fathers wrote the first Constitution. Abigail Adams, the wife of our founding father, John Adams, wrote to her husband on March 31st of 1776, just a few months prior to our independence. She had these words to say for her husband: I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited powers into the hands of the husbands. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we're determined to foment a rebellion, and we will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. So that was in 1776, a little longer than 100 years ago. So how did we get to here? So the first thing that happened is Seneca Falls. So we didn't get the right to vote in the original Constitution. Oops. We'll go back. See if I can get this technology. Here we go. Susan B. Anthony. So there was two key women involved in the Seneca Falls Convention. And this happened in 1848. And so Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were the two women key in the planning and implementation of the Seneca Falls Convention. So who is Susan B. Anthony? Well, we all know her. She's on the dollar coin. I know when I was little, I was always super excited to get a dollar coin. In fact, I gave my children, when they had a tooth, the tooth fairy, so not me, actually the tooth fairy always gave dollar coins. And she was a Quaker. And this is kind of important because she was a women's rights activist and she played a pivotal role in the women's suffrage movement. Her activism began, though, very early at age 17. She began, as many women in the suffrage movement began, in the abolitionist movement. So she started by collecting petitions against slavery. And so this is kind of the first of a lot of parallels to some of our current events. She founded several temperance movements. And if you don't know what temperance means, don't feel bad. I had to look it up too for this presentation. Temperance is basically, they wanted to outlaw alcohol consumption. She's most known for drafting the constitutional amendment that gave women the right to vote, and for founding the National Women's Suffrage Association with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton is famous for saying, "The moment we begin to fear the opinions of others and hesitate to tell the truth that is in us, from motives of policy, are silent when we should speak. The divine floods of light and life no longer flow into our souls." Also an abolitionist, also working to end slavery. And many women in the suffrage movement felt that the Blacks of our country being enslaved was similar to women and what was their standing, their social standing, because women essentially were owned by their husbands and had no rights outside of their husbands, depending on where they lived. But her concerns went beyond those two things. She was concerned with parental rights, custody rights, property rights, employment, and income rights. Very concerned with divorce, the economic health of the family, and birth control. What we would in our modern league refer to as the reproductive freedoms. She recognized very early on that a woman's ability to control her own reproductive rights was tied to her ability to control her own life. She was also an outspoken supporter of the temperance movement. There it is again. Some people might say that that was a mistake. Stanton was committed to female suffrage above a Black man's right to vote, which ultimately led to a divide in the movement. So you might be able to think of more parallels to our current situation. So what the heck happened in Seneca Falls? No, that's not what we want. So there were men in attendance at Seneca Falls, and the most notable person in attendance, male in attendance, was Frederick Douglass. He was a lifelong advocate of women's suffrage. He saw the suffrage of all people, Black, women, Indigenous people, as the ideal of our country, but argued that the prejudice and violence against Black men made their need for the franchise more pressing. Also in attendance was Sojourner Truth, a famous activist best known for saying, "Look at my arm. I have plowed and I have planted and gathered into barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well." So by leaving women out of the conversation of suffrage, Black women were certainly also left behind. So the declaration from the sentiments, there's a complete list of the sentiments that came from Seneca Falls, but abbreviated list are these: the right to vote, the ability to participate in governance, not losing status upon marriage, for instance, not losing your right to your physical body, your wages, your property, your rights to your children, etc., 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 the right to support herself through gainful and equal employment and the ability to participate in church. So this happened in 1848. What happened then? Well, the Civil War happened. And that happened in 1861 to 1865. We had the Civil War. And the suffragettes had to put their cause on hold to support the war effort. There were some suffragettes who were pacifists, and so this starts the divide, because there does become a divide in the suffrage movement. So what exactly causes that divide? There are four key factors. First, we already talked about Black men versus and freedom versus the woman's right to vote. This is where some people might make a connection to Susan B. Anthony and biased, maybe even racist notions, because she was known to have said, and this is not a direct quote, that she would rather cut off her arm than lay down her life for a Black man if she was left out of the conversation for voting, which we could have a whole other conversation on how you view a person based on your perspective. Whether or not she was racist or biased, I think, is up for historical debate. But other things that caused a divide in the movement, the temperance movement, people wanting to outlaw alcohol, religion, which has long been a dividing factor in this country. And then, of course, there was lack of support even among women. The working class and the poor, they actually couldn't be a part of this movement. It was really those women that were privileged who were able to be part of this movement. And again, I could draw parallels to some of our current situations. Well, so then what? So then in 1865, the Civil War ends. And we have the new suffragette or suffragist. The suffragette was actually a demeaning term that some men and journalists used to talk about women in the suffrage movement. But they decided, many suffragists decided that they were going to claim that term for their own. And so even today, we tend to call women in this movement suffragettes and not suffragettes, but I think that's an interesting point of history. So there are two distinct women, Carrie Chapman Catt, who actually founded the League of Women Voters, and she was referred to as the General, and people who know me may see that I might have something in common with her. She described her own voice like a foghorn. Again, I find this super hilarious because I'm just loud. And she was a skilled political strategist who directed the National American Women's Suffrage Association. There's a mouthful, almost as big as our name, our local name, Arlington Heights, Mount Prospect, Buffalo Grove, et cetera, and is most known for bringing working women into the movement. She understood that they had to use the political mainstream to win the right to vote, and went state by state. Again, here's, World War I happens 1914 to 1918, and this involvement in the war effort helped to change people's mind. But again, there were some pacifists who were against the war. Alice Paul, many modern feminists love Alice Paul, myself included. She was a rebel. She was willing to go to jail and fight for her convictions. I have so much respect for her. She had a doctorate in political science. She founded the National Suffrage Association. She mobilized and began marching, and she was frequently jailed, as were her fellow activists. She embarrassed the President Wilson because he was upstaged by women being arrested, and this forced him to negotiate with the more mainstream feminists. I actually see parallels between, so Alice Paul was in your face as an activist. Carrie Chapman Catt was more calm. I believe, and I think a lot of historians agree with me, and so I didn't come up with this on my own, I have read it in several places, that if it weren't for those really hard-nosed activists embarrassing the politicians of the time by going to jail, all these women going to jail and chaining themselves to fences, that they never would have felt the need to negotiate with the more mainstream suffragists. The same, many people draw that same parallel between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that if it had not been for Malcolm X protesting, sometimes in a violent way, that Martin Luther King would have never been able to get what he was able to get done. Again, this is something that can be debated. But then, okay, so this is the constitutional amendment gets approached in early, and it becomes 60 years before its introduction and its passage. Why? The liquor lobby becomes staunchly opposed to the 19th Amendment because as ratification goes state to state, many suffragettes were part of the prohibitionist movement. Of course, many men opposed suffrage. Factory owners opposed suffrage because they didn't want to give women equal pay. Again, this becomes a current modern fight for equal pay. Let's tie this into Chicago. If you live in Chicago, you've hopefully been into either Marshall Fields on State Street, or you've been into the Chicago Historical building on Michigan Avenue that was once the first Chicago Library. Both of those buildings have the most amazing Tiffany ceiling. Stand in middle of the cosmetics section in Marshall Fields, look up amazing Tiffany ceiling, made mostly by women. And Tiffany at the time, he would say, but I have to use women because their hands are delicate to do this delicate work. Let's be honest. He wanted to pay the workers less, and by using women, he was able to pay them less. So, and that was in 1897. Many religious leaders were opposed to women having the right to vote, and even women were opposed. So it's important to note, just historically, that the red rose is a mark of the antis, whereas the yellow rose is a mark of the suffragist. So if you're trying to celebrate suffrage and you have a feminist in your life that you want to help celebrate, today's the day to give her yellow flowers, not red flowers, yellow flowers. In the end, the last state to finally ratify the 19th Amendment was Tennessee. So that happened on August the 18th of 1920. And this he was the youngest member of the House of Representatives, and his mother wrote him a letter urging him to vote and stand by the ladies. And so it was passed by one vote. So I think I have a slide. Okay. So people were left out. Working women were left out. Union, how do we get it done? In the end, how do we get it done? We got it done by using working women, by union organizers, by using open air tactics, basically literally standing in the middle of a street on a soapbox. The realization that they had to appeal to people's emotions and not their reason. Plus, we also had to have our allies in men, people of color. Certainly, privileged women were a big, huge part of this. historically, I mean, our League of Women Voters was founded because Carrie Chapman Catt, the seed money came from a sapphire that she was willed and she sold for the seed money of the League of Women Voters. But the willingness to go to jail, this was a big thing. They were not protected from the police. They were arrested for peaceful protesting, obstructing traffic. They'd be charged with obstructing traffic. And again, I can draw direct parallels to what is happening today. In the end, this jailing radicalized the 168 women who were jailed, but people were left out. And we cannot talk about this movement without talking about who was left out. People like Ida B. Wells, people like Sojourner Truth, they were left out. Black women were actually asked to march in the back of the parade. The women were afraid that if Black women were front and center, that they would never get the support from the Deep South states. And we cannot lose sight of those faults of our founding fathers. Because of widespread enduring inequality and racism from within the ranks of the women's suffrage movement, Black women, Asian women, Indigenous people all left out of the movement. It wasn't until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, almost a half a century later, August 6, 1965, that Black women were officially allowed to exercise their right to vote. I want to make note of one important suffragette. She is a Chicagoan, Ida B. Wells Barnett. She was an investigative journalist, educator, and an early leader in the civil rights movement. She was one of the founders of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and her bravery as a Black journalist in the Deep South raised awareness of the horrors of lynching and helped spur the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. So I think it's very important that we recognize her. In fact, the League of Women Voters of Chicago helped to rename a road in her honor. So how can you learn more about the suffrage movement? So a couple movies you could watch is Iron Jawed Angels, which is about the suffragettes, Mrs. America, which is about the fight for the ERA, Suffragette, which is about the British suffrage movement. There's a series on PBS, The Vote. A couple of books to read, One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson, all about voter suppression. Get ready to get mad. And if you want to stay mad, read Good and Mad by Rebecca Traynor. There's also The Handmaid's Tale. There's both a TV series as well as a book. The interesting thing about this, and I've read and seen both, is that, which I didn't know until recently, is that every single event in that book is based on something factual that has happened to women, which scares me just a little bit. The Notorious RBG about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Currently there is a local historical museum event about her life where I'm dying to go see. 12 Years a Slave. I think this is a movie that almost every American should see because it's about the horrors and realities of slavery. Harriet, one of the most underrated badass women in history, Harriet Tubman. It's a great movie. Killers of the Flower Moon. This is a book by David Grann about indigenous people, Native Americans, being taken advantage of and abused by our government. In the 1920s and 30s, literally millions and millions of dollars was stolen from the Native people of Osage County. This is an untold story that needs to be told. And then finally, Just Mercy, which is both a film and a book by Brian Stevenson, is about the faults of our judicial system. Currently, our league is updating our criminal justice policy. And if you are interested in that, I hope you will join us. So what can we do now? What can we do to honor the suffragettes and what they did to get this passed? I can't say it enough times. Our main mission here at the League of Women Voters is to get people to vote. So I hope you vote. Our local leaders define so much of our lives. And in the last election here locally, in Arlington Heights, where I live, only 9% cast a vote in the last local election. And two very important elections here locally were determined by less than 5 votes. So again, I cannot urge you enough times to vote. Make sure that you are requesting your mail-in ballot now. You can do it online. You can find those links on our website at www.lwvah.org. Make sure you're registered to vote. Voter suppression is still a problem. We're lucky here in Illinois. We have very little voter suppression, but it is alive and well in our country. And the attacks on the United States Postal Service, definitely a way to suppress the vote. Our military has been voting by mail for generations. It is safe. It is effective. This is how we need to protect our vote. Make sure everyone you know has filled out the census. How our schools are funded, how our roads are built, how almost everything about our civic life is determined is by that census. We need everyone to fill out the census, not just citizens, everyone, because our schools don't just serve citizens. Our roads don't just serve citizens, they serve everyone. And then finally, let's get the ERA passed. The version that is up for approval was approved by Congress in 1972. It was sent to the states and it reads, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. So urge your congressperson to overturn the deadline to pass the ERA, and let's get this done. So here we are, League of Women Voters. You can join us. What do? We're 100% volunteer. We're nonpartisan. In 100 years, we have never endorsed a single candidate or a political party. We register voters. We give every senior in District 214 and St. Viator a gift to help them to celebrate their birthday. In the last couple of years, we've done this on their voting birthday, on their 18th birthday, but because of COVID, we made the decision to give every senior in District 214, as we could, this gift right at the start of the school year. So our league, in less than a week, got together and stuffed 2,000 envelopes. So we have another 1,000 that we'll be stuffing over the next several days to give to these high school seniors. We're so excited about this effort. We will be going door to door with students in a socially distanced way to encourage people to vote. We plan on hitting about 6,000 doors this fall. We do mock elections in the schools. We support advocacy training. We do education on issues such as gun violence prevention, the environment, the Fair Tax Amendment. We have scout programs. We have library programs. We even have a mascot. So you can follow our mascot on Instagram at pause, the number 4, votes. So pause for votes. And those are my 2 greyhounds that I love to death, Sloan and Gus. And they vote for treats and all sorts of other things. So that's it. Thanks for coming and joining me on this presentation. I hope you follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram. We have 2 accounts on Instagram. One is run by our emerging leaders. Our league is actually open to all ages. If they're old enough to ask to be part of our league, we will have them. We have lots of opportunities for young people. Right now, as a mother of a senior in high school, I know that a lot of opportunities are being denied our children just because of COVID. And our league has been determined to try to give as many opportunities for kids as we possibly can. We are a nationally recognized organization. And so it is a great way to resume build by being engaged and involved in our league, or join us. So lots of different ways to engage with us. And thank you so much and have a great day. day. And if you have any questions, you can email me. My name is, again, Heidi Graham at info@gmail.com. Again, info.lwvah@gmail.com. Have a great day.